Hello out there to all you AET creators and innovators. It is time to talk video game design, and specifically today we're going to talk about levels and how we create them using tiled. Yes, tiled harkens back to those magical days of 16-bit gaming, allowing you to create retro maps, allow you to control different layers that you place objects and tiles on. And we're going to go over specifically some of the functions that allow tiled to work and allow you to become a master. My first stop is inside of our video game design unit, and I'm going to open up the page entitled Tilesets and Level Design and scroll down a bit. And here's a nice walkthrough right here that explains how you are going to create a tile set and import it into tiled. The first thing you want to do is to grab this file right here. And what this is going to allow you to do is to easily place tiles onto a grid so that when they import into the program tiled, that they will not look messed up. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Go ahead and download that template. So when you load that file up into Photoshop or Pixlr or whatever your favorite graphic software is, you're going to see this grid right here. And this grid is alternating magenta and white boxes, and each one of those boxes is exactly 16 by 16 pixels. That's going to be important because when we go into tiled, we're going to need to specify a size for each one of our tiles. And using this template, it's going to allow us to create our own tile sets using assets that are already available on OpenGameArt, and to create a tile set that we want to use. We can mix and match as we see fit. Inside of Video Game Design Chapter 7, there's also a link to opengameart.org, which we recommend that you use. These are all open source tile sets. And when we get there, what we're going to do is we're going to click on Browse, and then we're going to look for 2D art. Once we do that, it brings up some advanced search options in the side right here. What I'm going to do is in this search box, I'm going to type in 16. And the reason why I'm searching for 16 is because I want tiles that are 16 pixels by 16 pixels. Now, just because we type that in and just because our results seem to be of that size, it does not necessarily mean that they are. And let me show you an example. One tile set that I liked is this kind of square block one. It kind of reminds me of has a space theme to it, has a good retro look to it. I feel like I could create something fun out of this. So when I, open it up, I see a preview, and then I can download the actual tile set right here. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to import that file into Photoshop. So I've gone ahead and did that, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the marquee tool. And I'm going to select this whole file right here, and I'm going to press Control C, or if you're on a Mac, press the Apple button plus C to copy. Then I'm going to go back to that grid that I downloaded, and I'm going to paste that over top. And now down here in my layers panel, I can see that I have that grid as my background, and then I have that layer piece on top. And I actually can change the opacity of that so I can see the grid through it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Maybe set it to, let's say 70% right there. That looks about good. Now I'm going to press V. It's going to allow me to move the layer, and I'm going to move it so that the upper angle of it, and I might need to zoom in here to make sure that I get a very precise bead on these pixels. I'm going to move it so that the upper tile right here lines up over top of my grid. And you'll notice here that there's a space, and we do not want that space right there because that space will make it so that when we import it into tiled, these tiles right here are going to look pretty funky, and so are these because they're going to be half tiles. So we need to move these over. The way that I'm going to do that is, again, I'm going to use my marquee tool. I'm going to select that whole row, whole block of tiles right there. And I made a mistake. I went too far down right here. So I'm going to press and hold the Alt button. That allows me to subtract from a selection. and then I'm going to subtract off just the bottom section right there. So now I've done that. I'm going to press V again. That allows me to cut. You'll notice that the scissors icon appeared right there. And now I can move that over to on top of the grids. And if I want to, I can turn that background off. I'm going to change the opacity actually to be fairly high. That makes it a little easier to see. And what I'm going to do is essentially I'm going to go through and I'm going to rearrange where all of these bricks are inside of my tile set so that they butt up against one another pretty evenly. And here's a place where if I wanted to grab some tiles from another set and add them in, I could do that as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete some of this. I'm going to delete some of this so you can just see that behind this tile set that I'm creating, you can still see that grid behind it. And the grid is my reference to know what is going to be considered a tile when I import it into tiled. When all is said and done, I'm going to get something that looks like this. I didn't use any different tiles, but like I said, I could have gone into Open Game Art and I could have mixed and matched. I could have found some tiles that look like they go along with it and add those in. You know, if I wanted to add maybe a few of these tiles, I could have done that. The key here is that I'm allowing my creative energy to flow. So you'll notice here I'm going to just make this layer invisible, and you can see that underneath that grid is still there. Now I'm going to save this file. When I save it, I am going to turn off the layer visibility for that background layer, just in case. And now I'm going to save this as a tile set. I'm going to use a PNG file to save it as. You can use a JPEG as well. That's fine. And now let's take a look at how to import that into tiled. So inside of tiled, I'm going to create a new map. The orientation for these tiles is going to be orthogonal. That means basically squares. That's the template that we're using. Everything else is fairly easy. I'm just going to default to 100 by 100 tiles. My tile size here, however, needs to be changed. So it defaults to 32. I was using 16, so I'm going to change my height and my width to 16 pixels. I will save it as sample 2. And now I have this blank map right here. And to import a tile set, I'm going to go to this pane down here. You have two. Normally when we look at windows, the tab to select the window is on the top. In tiled, the tab to select is on the bottom, which may throw some of you off a little bit, so I can go back and forth between these two. I want to be in the Tile Sets tab, and I'm going to click New Tile Set. And here is where I'm going to import my tile set. So I'm going to go to Browse. I'm going to choose that Space Blocks tile set that's what I ended up naming it. Seemed appropriate. Select that. It knows to default to 16 by 16. It says use a transparent color. I will do that. And I'm going to select Pick Color from Image. And I'm just going to use this bottom right where there's no tiles. I'm going to use that as my transparent color. When I click OK, we'll see the tile set in here. If I hold down Control and use the scroll wheel on my mouse, I can zoom in and out of that tile set right here as long as I'm hovered over it. So that's helpful. So let's start creating a level. Now my tiles are kind of small in here, so I want to zoom in. Again, I'm going to hold down Control and I'm going to press up on the scroll wheel of my mouse, and you'll see where on my mini map I'm looking now. I'm going to zoom a little bit out, and let's move this down to the bottom. I'm going to start down at the bottom. Now in tiled, the very slow way to do it would be just to select individual tiles. And I'm going to make a ground here, and I could just select individual tiles and keep on tiling away. Faster would be to grab a chunk of tiles. So if I click and hold, you'll notice now I can drag a section of tiles in. And I can do that kind of in any regular shape I want, like that. But maybe even more interesting is if I click and hold down on all of these, by default it's going to have a huge block of tiles, but up top there is a dice icon, and that's random mode. Now because I have a bunch of blocks of the same color and I kind of don't care which one is there, in fact having a random appearance would be kind of cool, I can select that. It's going to default back to a single tile right here, but now I can kind of draw in what I want. I'm holding down the mouse button, and you'll notice that as I'm drawing, it's choosing different tiles. And now let me choose a different color here. I can. And I'm just going to kind of draw over top of this. And you'll notice that every time I draw over it, it selects a different random tile, which is kind of cool, and it adds a little bit of flavor to my map. So I'm going to do that. That looks pretty neat. That looks like a good ground to start off with. So I'll go through and add a few more details. I'll maybe select a green here. Again, I'm going to make sure that I'm on random right here, and maybe just make some, like a top here, some things hanging down, stalagmites and stalactites. Something like that. Looks pretty good. I'm going to make the top pretty level, pretty even. Notice how even when I go over it with the random brush, if I just hold it down and paint over it, it will still paint random things over top of what I've already done. Alright, now we have kind of a top to our level. I'd imagine that the character is going to start over here and come this way through the level. The background is kind of boring. There's nothing there. That's something that I can address. So if I want, I can do, let's say I wanted this color right here, it's kind of bluish color. If I wanted that to be the background, I can go and select this fill button right here after I'm kind of all done. And as I move it through, you'll notice it's randomizing again because I have that random button still placed. And as soon as it looks pretty good, I can click and it sets it into place like that. So that works for me. I'm going to just add a few details here. Something like that. So that looks like maybe there's some gold dripping or something. And I feel pretty good about this. Now, this is not obviously a work of art, but it's something that's in progress. And I feel like this is a pretty good start to a level. And this also gives you a pretty good explanation of what tiled looks like and how to play around with it. Now there's a lot more tools up here to use. There's an eraser, there's a magic wand, like if I want to change all of one tile, just similar to a magic wand in Photoshop or Pixlr, I can select all of those tiles and re-stamp them. And notice that when I try to draw outside of that magic wand area, it won't let me. So that's kind of nice. So if I want to change just the color of all of this green up here, I can use the magic wand tool and select all of that. Although it will not consider, because these are all different tiles, I can hold down the shift button to add to a selection. And I can select whole portions like that. I could also just use this rectangle tool. That's going to allow me to, or at least it should, allow me to select whole areas and go over them with whatever tiles I have selected over here. So I just did that with that one. Pretty much that is the way that we place tiles in the background. Now what about foreground, like objects or candles or characters, enemies, anything? How do I place things on the foreground? Let's talk about that. So I'm fast forwarding ahead because I went back into OpenGameArt and I found a sprite sheet that contains some objects that I felt could have worked for my game here that I'm designing my level. And I want to create a sprite sheet with these. We can create multiple tile sets within Tile. And so I'm going to create a different one for just objects, things that are going to be on the foreground. So I pasted it back into that same template file, and when I click back onto that template, you'll notice that these objects are not sized correctly to be within my tiled program. And that's a problem for me. What I can do is I can transform this selection. I can shrink it down so that it fits. The shortcut to do that is Control T. When I do that, you're going to see this bounding box come up. And I am going to hold down Shift. And when I hold down Shift, it makes sure that it maintains the aspect ratio as I shrink and grow this selection. What I want to do is I'm going to move this selection so that it's up in the upper corner and maybe even zoom in a little bit. Let's do that so we can make sure that our tiles are in the right spot. Okay, I'm going to press Control T again, and I'm going to shrink this down a little bit more. Still not the right size. That looks like we're getting there. Maybe like right there. Let's see. If I hit enter here, shrinks it down. Notice how some of the tiles are a little bit off, like this compass is coming up into the next one. If I press V, that allows me to move it, and I'm just going to use the arrow keys to nudge it down one. And when I do that, you can see that it fits for the most part. I might have to shrink it down a tiny bit more. There we go. So I did that, and now I can see that all these objects are contained within their own tile. And that's what we want. So now when I zoom back out, I can see what this tile set will look like. I turn the background off, and I am going to save this file. And again, I'm going to import it into Tiled. I'm going to go back into Tiled and go into my tilesets mini map over here. And I'm going to select this button right here, which is New Tileset. Same thing that we did before. I'm going to browse sample space items. That's what I called it. Make sure it's 16 by 16. I am going to use a transparent color. Again, I'm going to use the eyedropper tool, and it's going to bring up the image. And because I left the background transparent, when I hover over here, you'll notice that it changes to black, and that's okay. So I'm going to select that. I do not need a margin or a space, and that should be 0 and 0. And then I'm going to click OK. And now I have sample space items right here that I can use. Now the problem is, if I were to use one of these sample space items right now, and I were to use it as a tile and place it in here, and let me undo this selection right here. We do that by going back to the brush. All right, so I'm going to select just some random tile. I'll place it, and you'll notice that, it overwrote what was underneath, and that doesn't look good. That's not how we put in objects. I'm going to press Control Z a couple times and undo that. What we need to do instead is go to this Layers tab. And inside this Layers tab, you'll see my tile layer 1, and I can click and I can rename that. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add another layer. It's going to be a tile layer. If I wanted to make like a background layer, I could put an image in the background to like, make something different besides tiles. That's a possibility. But I'm going to do a tiled layer. Much like Photoshop, these tiled layers, one sits on top of the other. So I'm going to go to tiled layer 2, and now when I place in an object like this energy orb, you'll notice that it does not overwrite the tile that's underneath. So I can place objects that way. And if I wanted to change the order of these tiles, I can use these up and down arrows right here. What's going to happen if I put the object layer below the tiles is they're just going to disappear. They're still there, but they're behind all the tiles, so you can't see them. Make that go back to the forefront again, and you'll see that there they are. And I can add as many layers as I want. In fact, it probably makes a lot of sense, just like in Photoshop or Pixlr, to use as many layers as you can. If I don't want a layer to be edited, I can lock it. So now I can't add anything into this layer even when I click. And if I want a layer to disappear, I can click the eye and I can see what it looks like underneath. So like if I were to move these, I can't tell that my objects are there. If I were to click the eye right here, oh, there they are, just the objects now. So I don't even see the background. And that's how we use layers inside of Tiled. And you can even set the opacity of your layers just like you do in Photoshop. So if I were to set a little bit of opacity, put that back on top and turn this one back on, And notice that these orbs kind of have a little bit of a translucent effect to them. And that is almost everything you need to know with tile. Now, when I'm done with my map, and I'm going to go back to the mini map right here, and you can see this is just a small section of it. So I'm going to zoom out. My whole map looks like this, and it is not complete yet. But when I am done, I can go up to the File menu, and I can go Export as Image. And when I export it, it's going to export as an image that I can then import into my Google Slide and cut up pieces of it to discuss different parts. If you look at the sample level design for Super Metroid that is inside of our VGD7, A Whole New World content page, you'll see down here level design example with Super Metroid. And you can see how I used a Google Slide to kind of break down and do this level design assignment within Google Slides. And you can see how rough sketches of the level, obstacles and set pieces, and then final level design. Here's the whole map right here, zoomed out, but then each specific section is tackled along with different events or set pieces that happen within that particular portion of the level. So you can see here, this is a good example to look at if you want more insight into what your project should look like. And that should give you a very good start with using Tiled. Tiled is obviously a much more complicated program than what we went over. There's lots more brushes and there's lots more just tools that you can use to create your map. But you don't need to overcomplicate it. If you would like to continue to work with Tiled and maybe even learn a little programming and put your skills to the test and become the next retro game designer one day, certainly that is something that you can do. But for the purposes of this project, we're just looking for you to do some level design and show us what you got. So I welcome all of your levels, and I'm looking forward to checking them out and seeing what you got. So with that, this is your course manager, Eric Dillerman, signing out. Until next time.